Now, I've been setting this up. Of course, I'm probably the only one. Oh, I can use it. Good. So when Hannah came this morning, she said, I feel like a fraud. You have no idea how I feel coming after Noah and Matt. I don't know if there's a worse thing than a fraud, but that's me. And obviously, my topic is really exciting after everything that you've heard. It may not be, but it's really important. And I'm obviously not as tall as everybody else, so I'm just going to bend this so you can hear me a bit better. So I'm going to talk to you about an important piece of work that we're doing as part of Human Animal Trust, and that's developing an ethical framework for One Medicine. How this actually came about. So in 2021, they had a similar meeting like this online, and they decided that actually if we are to collaborate together, we're going to have to develop some sort of a framework that really allows the professional to work together, work more closely, but also provide them with the guidance and assurance that actually if they're going to engage in these sort of activities, they're not going to get into any sort of trouble with their professional bodies. So we want to develop a framework which is focused on a collaboration and that supports ethical principles for delivering of clinical research in wider setting. So where are we starting? Good chance for me to show off some of my certificates, so I don't feel like a complete fraud standing here. So as part of this journey, because my background is in human clinical research, I started looking into veterinary research and what goes on. So on the human side, we've got loads of rules. We've got the ICAGCP, that's the International Commission for Harmonization Good Clinical Research Practice. We've got the Declaration of Health and Care, so many more. In the US, they have the Belmont Report, which I'm sure lots of you have heard of. It was one of those horrendous things that they did, research actually funded by the US government into syphilis that went on for years and years and years after treatment was available, and people were so horrified. They set up this report as to how we should actually do research. There's tons and tons of legislation as to how we do research. Now, on the animal side, in the UK, we've got this very old 1986. Some people in the audience probably weren't even born then, but basically we have this Animal Science Procedure Act that governs the principles of how we do research in veterinary practice. And there are issues associated with it, and I will tell you a little bit about that. There is the equivalent of GCP called veterinary GCP. There is a slight problem with that. I will highlight it as well. And there's this WICH, GL9, which is basically the veterinary equivalent of the ICAGCP. So the V has been inserted to cover the veterinary part. It's something that gets incorporated into the European legislation, but also into the FDA components in the US. So to find out about it, because there are people in the audience who used to have to suffer me teaching the ICAGCP as part of their involvement in clinical research. So I thought, and I'm going to add a little bit more into this. And I got myself a little certificate in VGCP as well, so I knew what it was all about. And I also got myself a little certificate in best practice for consenting in veterinary practice, so I knew what it was all about. And when you look at the bit in the middle, basically, there is nothing. There's nothing that guides the collaboration between people. There's a lot of talking about it, but there is nothing that supports people actually being officially involved, working together without having to worry about the implication of it. So we want to change that. If we want to be doing some of the things that were being proposed this morning, some of the collaborations, we really need to give people the tools to be able to do that without any sort of repercussions. So when I compare the GCP, that's the human one, that's the bit we use in the human clinical trials, with the veterinary one big problem. When you sit through the session, and one of the components that I used to teach, there are two big things to take away from the human GCP. Why do we have it? Well, most of the time we have it because of the horrendous things that have happened in the past. So we've now got these things that say two most important things. You have to protect the rights, the safety, and the well-being of the participants. And obviously, you shouldn't cheat, so you should really protect the credibility of the data and the integrity so the data can be verified. Now, when you look at the VGCP part, that bit about the nonsense about someone's rights is not there. It's just not there. If you sit through the VGCP session, all you find is, yes, obviously you do need the consent from the owner of the animal, which is why I had to do that certificate as well. But the most part of it is actually about the data collection, about protecting the data, and there is very little about protecting the participants. So a great paper, if anybody's really, really interested, written a few years ago, a Belmont report for animals. So the Belmont report, as I mentioned, is a US-based document, which is there to set out about the protection for participants in research. And really, we need probably something similar for animals. But for One Medicine, we need a bit more. We need something that can allow people to collaborate. So we've started on that, and we've created a different version of what some of you might already be familiar with. That's the public patient involvement and engagement, or PPIE for short. It's a bit of a mouthful to keep saying public patient involvement engagement. PPIE, and obviously the patient in this context can't always give us the answers, as it has been mentioned. So we basically substituted the word and created public guardian involvement and engagement, which is a PGIE, again, shortened. When it comes to human patients, this whole concept is designed around involving people in decision-making that has impact on their lives. So patients can participate in actually designing a specific piece of research. Patients can participate in designing a specific service that's being delivered to them within healthcare. Of course, again, in veterinary practice, that is a bit more tricky. So you have the guardians who would be involved. And PPI is generally considered to have a positive impact because it can really drive positive change. So it can keep things focused, it can keep it real. It's not just a sort of white towel removed, loads of discussions. These are things that are relevant to those for whom they are intended. And it can have a really positive effect in terms of the professionals as well, because let's face it, everybody who spoke here today has spent many years at university learning very long words and forgetting how to speak to other people. So having patients and having guardians is really important because they are there, the people to keep you focused while you're actually here in the first place. So essentially, PGIE is a form of co-production which will help us develop the framework for One Medicine. And it will be through consensus of professionals, guardians, and also members of the public. And we've set up a group. There's quite a few of the members of the group in the audience who have been really helpful in trying to develop some of the things that are coming up that I'm talking about. So first of all, representation. So obviously, if we have a guardian, the guardian is acting as a representative. So can we actually, within the veterinary section, utilize the same concept we use within human clinical research and within human healthcare? So can we have guardians like we have for children and for people who lack capacity, people who consider the best interest on behalf of others? But on the other hand, can a human really ever make a consideration of a best interest for a non-human patient? Which is where things get a bit more complicated. So can we utilize slightly different thinking? And I'm not going to go into loads of details about some ethical, philosophical theory. I know you've had your lunch and probably not enough coffee. So let's stay awake. I'm going to just mention this one thing, is the capabilities approach that has been proposed by a lady who is indeed a philosopher. A pretty good one, if you're interested. Her name is Martha Nussbaum. The concept was originally developed actually around allowing people and societies to have specific rights. But she has since also applied it to animals. And I will mention it a little bit more, but do keep an eye about it. It is abbreviated sometimes, capabilities approach, CA. It's good to have the good spaghetti letter alphabet. So CA is that one, in on top of GCP, VGCP, and all the other things. So Where are we so far? So, our framework, the focus is building collaborative principles for One Medicine and developing guiding principles for veterinary medicine research that can promote and engagement of professionals in One Medicine. And obviously professionals on both sides of the divide, but as well scientists, engineers, and everybody who really wants to be involved. But these principles, like they are in the Belmont Report, like they are in the GCP, like they are in the Declaration of Helsinki, they should always be about respect for autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. And I will get a little bit to that in a minute. So basically, it's a fair deal for all animals in health research, but also in its application, and promotion of health medicine, but never at the expense of animals' life. So through the meetings that we've had, we've done quite a bit of work, and we do have a pretty good mixture of people, and we have identified 5 core points. One is about defining the principles for clinical research and the ethical consideration. And I will mention why that is, why we need to actually define clinical research. Then consider animal welfare and quality of life. Then have a framework for governance and collaboration, transparency and trust with clients/guardians, and integration with human medicine and research. So if I go just a little bit more detail. So I did mention the Animal Scientific Procedure Act, which is the bit that we have in the UK. The problem with that right now is that really the main application for that is for animals that are used in experiments. But because of the way it's written, it also applies to animals within veterinary practice. So every time you as a vet are not doing something that is 100% standard treatment, even though probably if you get 5 vets in the room, nobody would agree 100% on what is a standard treatment, which is not that dissimilar to humans. But basically, if you're not using standard treatment and you want to do something that is really, really helpful to your patient, but happens to fall under this thing called ASPA, then you're going to get in trouble. So we need to have a really strong clarification as to where things actually sit, so people can get engaged without having to be worried about what legal repercussions any of these things are going to have. So that's the bit that is really important. We need to consider animal welfare and quality of life. So again, this is the basic principle of GCP. We need to protect the participants on both sides. And this includes, obviously, adopting some of the assessments. I know not all of them are always very popular, but also consider species-specific differences and implement the quality of life assessments and regular monitoring of the well-being. So safeguard, basically, the welfare of those involved in research, irregardless of number of limbs they may have. Linking that back, when it comes to the animals, again, to the capabilities approach, or CA, because the core component of that is that we cannot use the animals just as means to an end. They are ends, they are beings in their own right, so we have to consider them and treat them as ends in their own right, not means. Next one is obviously the framework for the governance and the collaboration. So a framework that is fit for purpose and practical, something that we can actually present to the governing bodies like the RCVS, so they can amend and update their codes of practice. And it will massively help in terms of reducing the regulatory burden that is currently involved for veterinary practices to actually get involved in any sort of research. Because right now, when you go to a human hospital, you can get your project approved by a research ethics committee, which, yes, is a national process, and some of it will have to go to the MHRA. But you certainly do not need a license to do research within your hospital. But if you're a veterinary practice that is doing something that is not standard, whatever standard means, you will need to have a home office license, plus you will also need to have the ethical approval. So everything is just too overcomplicated and not really necessarily looking after anyone's welfare. Jobs worse, basically. Okay, and transparency is really important, and trust, like in any research. So this is for the guardians or clients, depend how you refer to people, the patients basically. So building the trust, disclosing the information, really big part of obviously any consenting process, having access to any prior research that has been done, making sure that this is available, being really open, and informed consent. And the final one, integration with human medicine and research. So obviously, lots of stuff goes on already. There are lots of things already out there. We don't have to keep repeating everything over and over again. So having to integrate all the existing human clinical trials framework would be really helpful in terms of advancing the initiative, involve veterinary practices and vets to actually get on board with the way that trials are run within human medicine and vice versa, so we can actually have comparative things. Of course, as discussed this morning as well, it would help if we actually use the same terminology to start with, so something again to look at, but that's certainly one where we can already start with some easy steps, because there's already tons of work already out there that we can translate into that. Obviously, there are stakeholders to all of this. At the end, we're not just doing it to keep ourselves busy. We need to really work with the professional bodies like the RCVS and GMC to recognize some of this work, and of course the regulators like the MHRA and the Home Office that produces the licensing. And we really need to get more professionals on board to provide us comments and feedback, basically. We need to have really good tools that are agreed and can be used as part of the framework for the decision making. And we need some sort of parliamentary involvement, because we can't change any of the laws without it's going through the parliament. And hopefully then at the end of it also update some of the professional standards. So that's me done with that. Running out of time. And obviously, thank you to all the guys from the PGIE group, some of whom are here today, because all of this is really through your input as well. So thank you.